So, welcome to another edition of Randy Steve's Outdoor Adventures. This is our third podcast. So, we got a bit of an issue this year with wintertime. We're so used to the past, 5, 6 years of decent ice. We not necessarily big, long seasons. I mean, the one season we had, 16 inches of ice here?
Yeah.
But
14, 16 inches.
we've at least had consistent ice seasons where you can depend on 4, 5, 6 inches of ice every year to go out fishing.
And usually by late January, early February, like you said, at least we have something to work with.
But now here's the problem is we're in mid-January, soon to be end of January. My mortgage payment's coming up, I know that.
And today's the 26th.
Yeah, and zero ice. And, for those of you guys that are, saying, well, what about the Poconos? Well, Poconos, I've been checking. It's been unsafe up there, even some of the easiest to freeze over lakes like Promised Land.
I know a couple guys that are fishing some private ponds up there and stuff, and even they're just driving around covering a lot of places, and the best they can find is like 3 inches, and that was a week ago. It just hasn't been consistent. Some places have had safe ice, but it's not there for very long.
Yeah, Ontelaunee, we saw safe ice in December for 2 days?
Yeah, about 2 days.
And then gone.
Of course, during the week when we got to work. But,
yeah, and then
how that goes.
And then some guys, I have no idea who, decided to go out last Wednesday after 3 days of decently cold weather, not like brutally cold, but decently cold, and they took their lives in their line. I know that ice was like 2 inches at most.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay on the bank.
250 here. I will break through on 2 inches of ice. I'm a big boy. I will not be able to do that, man. So let's get to the point. It's like, what do you do when you have no ice fishing to do in Pennsylvania? Like, what do we do here with bass? Because you have to open water fish.
Either you got to stay at home and let the cabin fever set in, or if there's no safe ice, you got to go try and hit some open water somewhere.
Right. I mean, now you always have that fallback in Pennsylvania, with trout, and we got Tulpahawken, which will year-round have trout in it.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, that's always something you can keep in mind on. But as me and Randy get older, we really kind of get bored of trout fishing.
Yeah, I like something that fights a little more. Like if I'm gonna go out all day, in those tough winter days, if I'm gonna go out all day to hopefully catch, 2 or 3 trout in my local stream, I would much rather take a little bit more risk and go out and try and catch something a little bigger, whether it's a bass or a walleye or a muskie. I'd rather take a shot at something bigger. You might not get bit at all, but I've caught enough trout. So,
Yeah. And don't get us wrong, like we still enjoy going out trout fishing every once in a while. You can see from our videos, we do first day of trout. We do, Tulpahawken when they first freshly stock it, and obviously steelhead brown trout. We'll probably do that for as long as we can. But as far as just the regular state stock stuff, like we've kind of grown past that. I would say, when you're catching 12 inchers one after another, and it's the same species, same size, it gets.
We did plenty of it. My gosh, we caught thousands of them over the years. So it's just for now you just put it down for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, measuring contest here. I mean, I think our best day, what was that? The North Kill or was it Little Schuylkill?
I think it was the North Kill total.
Yeah.
Because I had like what?
You had like 70.
Yeah, it was 70 some, and you were not far behind.
I had like 60. So guys, I mean, when we're talking about. You get bored of it when you go and catch 130, 140 trout between 2 guys in one day. It gets monotonous.
It's fun,
it gets to the point where it's just like, oh, another one, another one, another one.
It's fun, but ready to do something new.
Exactly. So let's get to the topic of, with cold water bass fishing, basically, and we've been doing a lot more of it recently, simply because Randy got a boat. He has had the champion first. Now he's the ranger. But with the blue marsh and Ontelaunee and that stuff, like, you got to put the time in to really understand the lakes, especially in the cold water, because fish group up this time of year.
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, Like you said, the fish do group up when it gets colder, when that water starts falling, gets falling through the 50s and gets down into the 40s. The fish start to get into their wintering holes, and they really start to group up, which is bad from the standpoint of there's a lot of room around them. They're all kind of in only a couple areas. But then the advantageous part of it, once you do find them, you found them. It's a load of them usually.
Yeah, you don't really have to waste a lot of gas, finding them once you find them, and you can basically stay on top of them, and it's nice to be able to find them because, again, when you find the wintering hole, you use that then for springtime to know, okay, this is where I winter, this is where they winter. Now, where do they spawn? And when it gets tough, the transition, you can kind of intersect that in between using, I know they're here at this time and here at this time. So they got to be into here in between at some point.
Yeah, you can kind of predict their movements. Same thing, similar to like deer hunting or anything like that. If you know where they were and where they're going to, you can kind of at least narrow down parts of the lake, to be searching for them while they're in between point A and point B.
Yeah. So we'll get into specific lakes that we talk about. I mean, what do you want to do? Talk about Blue Marsh first, or Ontelaunee, or?
Yeah, we can talk about Blue Marsh. We'll start there at the fall to winter transition.
Let's do that.
So we fished a local club tournament on Blue Marsh. I guess it was the last weekend in October.
Yep, October.
And that's our local lake. I live about 15 miles from there, and Steve's not too far away
10
either.
minutes.
And here where we're located in southeastern Pennsylvania, that's one of the only lakes within like an hour or two driving radius of where we live where you can run an outboard engine. Most of our lakes around here are electric motor only. So we did a club tournament at the end of October when the water was 60 degrees and the fish were shallow. We were catching them on crankbaits and stuff. But when the water starts falling and gets down into like the mid to lower 50s, that's when these fish really start moving, and they really start following the bait out of the creeks, heading back towards the main lake, and everything starts moving towards their wintering holes. So what I'm going to call the fall to winter transition in our area starts in that, I call it right around 50 degree water temperature.
55 as a maximum, I would say, but yeah, 50 is definitely when they're 55. They start to move. 50 is when everybody's moving.
Agreed. When that water hits 50 degrees and it's falling, those fish are in transition. They're moving from their shallow areas, towards the winter areas.
Mm-hmm.
So during that time of year, with the water in the low 50s, down into the upper 40s, we're catching them, on like secondary points, rock transitions, ledges, that are adjacent to deep water. We're mainly catching them on jerk baits. Depending on the conditions, they can be caught a variety of different ways. But at our home lake, day in and day out, it's a known staple of Blue Marsh Lake. We're primarily throwing the jerk bait.
Yeah, and then your style of jerk bait is really, it's up to you. I mean, there's better ones, and there's ones that aren't as efficient.
Depends how deep a water you're fishing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many different jerk baits out on the market that all cover different areas of the water column, and you got to, wherever you're marking fish, if you're seeing them in 6 foot of water, 8 foot of water, 10 foot of water, that's going to indicate what type of jerk bait you need to be throwing.
Yeah, and like it's again how much would we go back to pick and retail here with jerk baits? It's basically your price point. Like if you're not willing to spend $10, $15, $20 on a jerk bait, then you got to find one within your price point that does the job. And and honestly, I don't think it really needs anything fancy. It's just more about what you have confidence in and what you're willing to spend.
I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, you got to get the bait to where the fish are. So when you start getting into that little bit later period, where you're getting into winter and those fish start getting deep, especially when they get down into that 12 to 15 foot depth range, there aren't many jerk baits on the market that can reach those fish. Because in our experience, our lake has like, normally I would say about 3 to 4 foot of visibility. So unless you can get that jerk bait less than 3 to 4 feet above their head, if you're any further away from them than that, they're not going to come up for
Yeah,
it.
jerkbait's definitely a clear water bait. You know, up in New York, you can basically call smallmouth out of 20 foot of water with a
Yeah.
jerkbait, no
Oh, yeah.
problem.
You'd be surprised how far they'll come
Yeah.
in clear water
But-
when they can see it.
But around here with Blue Marsh specifically, they should call it green marsh. Very rarely do you have water, like you said, 3 to 4 visibility. So you got to get down to where then within a foot or two of their striking range.
Right, you got to
There's-
get that jerk bait close to them, otherwise they're not even going to know it's
Yeah.
there.
So I mean, there's other ways of doing it. Suspend dots, you know, getting a bigger bill. You know, off the top of my head, some of the ones that we've used in the past or have used with the bigger bill, the Rapala, the deep diver, I can't
The
think of
X-Rap
X-Rap deep. They have that big bill. You got the Mega Bass, Stacy 90s. We do dabble with them a little bit.
Mega
but,
Bass Vision 110
Yeah.
plus ones,
Plus
Vision 110
twos.
plus twos.
you know,
Um,
you want to get down.
Storm, Thunderstick Junior, Deep
Thunderstick
Thunderstick Junior. Yeah, Lucky Craft, Stacy 90s.
I haven't seen Strike King come out with one. I've just seen.
Strike King has the KVD jerkbait. It's the size 300D.
Okay.
It's a slightly larger bait. It's like 4 1/4 inches, I believe.
Mhm.
But on the pack it says they dive to 11 foot. Obviously, if you want to be throwing them on fluorocarbon to help
Yep.
get that depth out of them. But I have caught some fish on that as well, and
Yeah.
that's one of the cheaper ones. I would have to say, because I'm sure as you guys know, the Lucky Crafts, the Mega Bass, they can get expensive. I think the Vision 110s or plus twos are like $25
Yeah,
a piece.
they're expensive.
So if you can't spend that, don't want to spend that, the cheapest jerkbait that I've seen on the market that can get down into that 10-foot range or possibly better is that Strike King KVD 300D. They, I believe, go for either $8.99 or $9.99. They're
Yeah.
very reasonably priced.
That is reasonably priced, and Strike King. I mean, at least from my experience, has always they've never been the best thing out there, but they've always been a solid choice for somebody who's not willing to spend the money on those types of baits. They've always performed pretty well for me. They've always caught fish, so and at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about just going out there and catching fish. So
They have a pretty good selection as far as colors go.
Yes. So
in that line as well.
yeah, let's talk colors with that. What you said about selection of colors. What would you think about jerk baits, Pennsylvania, specifically Southeast Pennsylvania? What type of colors would you look for in order to mimic what our fish are eating?
With jerk baiting, I mean, it's a visual presentation. It's all about them seeing it, and they typically inspect it really close, especially when the water gets cold. They typically will track that bait for a while. They're going to study it as you're pulling on it and pausing. A lot of times they're just sitting right there, inches away from it, looking at it. So it's definitely a match the hatch type of presentation. So you want to, most lakes in the fall to that winter time period, early spring, most fish, at least around here, they're feeding on bait.
Yep.
So you have your shad imitations, depending on your lake, again, blueback herring, alewives, depending on where you're at, you want to try and match the forage in your lake. Our lake, a lot of our lakes, Blue Marsh, Ontelaunee, our local lakes here, they mainly have alewives in them
Yep.
as the forage fish. So we're using, silver type colors, a little bit of blue in it, maybe a little bit of purple, and also perch patterns have always worked for me in our area here, our lakes, in our local rivers. I've had quite a bit of success on perch pattern jerkbaits as well.
Yeah, and that's something that the perch and with both smallmouth and largemouth, that's a connection that goes pretty much everywhere. Young of the year perch, that's just a pattern that works pretty much anywhere. You can go any.
It's kind of like a crawl pattern.
Yeah,
It's just one of those good.
It's just one of those
colors.
things that in the north, if you're mimicking perch, probably a solid choice. With the alewives, at least what I saw, because we basically use similar colors, but with the alewives, what I saw is in the beginning of the winter, I tend to have a little bit more luck on a more brighter blue, and then as that season rolls on with winter, even going into spring, those alewives kind of change color. I don't know if they lose that blue or what's going on.
I think because they get deeper, they start
they
bleaching
lose,
a little bit, just much like a bass would.
yeah, and they get more of a black back versus a blue back. So black back tends to work better for me, at least in the spring, while blue works in the early season. I mean, if you could figure out a bait where it has both,
Right.
you got the money because you got a bait that works throughout the whole winter. But that's just something that I saw with alewives that it tend to have a little more luck in the blue in the early part of winter and black at the late part of winter.
Yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of it depends on the type of day, too. You know, if you have a bright day versus a cloudy day, or a day where it's calm versus a day that it's windy, that makes a great deal of difference down fairly, when you get a little bit deep in the water. When you get down to like 10 feet deep, it makes a big difference whether it's light out or darker out, with it being overcast, or if the wind is cutting down that light penetration. Colors can look totally different.
Yes, they can.
Just depending on the day.
And going with the sun too. Something we found with the banks, it always seems to be the sunny banks.
Yeah, in the wintertime, you either want to be using your electronics to locate fish, or if you're someone that is bank fishing, or if you don't have electronics, you want to concentrate on those sunnier banks. There are certain rocky banks that get more sun for a larger part of the day, just depending on how your lake is set up, that you'll notice after a while those are your more high percentage spots. You tend to catch more fish. Tends to be more active fish on the sunnier banks.
And something I learned, I picked that up, actually wasn't even bass fishing. My Uncle Terry gave me these olden fisherman books, and I wanted to learn more about pike fishing. And they always talked about, and we use this up at O'Sullivan, if you guys check out our O'Sullivan videos with our pike fishing, a lot of the rules we apply for bass fishing we use for the pike up there, because they're similar, just more northern. The northern facing coves. People want to think that those are probably the cold ones. Actually not, because the sun is in the south in the wintertime, and that sun hits directly in those north coves.
It gets more direct sunlight.
So those are the ones that get warm first, so those are the banks that you want to be more focusing on in the winter, because that's the areas that is the hottest versus the shaded parts which get no sun.
Right. Chase them sunny banks if you don't have the electronics. And the best thing to do, in my opinion, is just to search for fish.
Oh, yeah.
But if you don't have the ability to do that, you want to concentrate on the sunnier banks, the banks where the rock transitions, like from big boulders to smaller chunk rock, or vice versa. If you get an area where it transitions from chunk rock into like smaller pea gravel, when you get closer to the spawn, that tends to be a high percentage area too.
The tree, obviously, any kind of extra cover there too. If you have a tree or anything there that breaks up that rock, to give it a little extra cover, a little something different, they can focus fish on that too.
Right, especially if you're fishing a lake that does not have grass in it, like one of our local lakes that we fish a lot, Ontelaunee. It's a grass lake. They relate to that grass all year long as it's there. But on another lake, the reservoir that we're talking about, our local lake here at Blue Marsh, it doesn't have grass in it. Some years it gets a little bit, but after the high water we had in the last 2-3 years, there isn't hardly any grass in the lake. So the fish tend to be on the rock and in the woods, stumps, laydowns, fallen trees, that kind of thing. If you get a little bit of wood in those rock transition areas, it can be money.
Yep. And again, just because you go down the bank and you see riprap or rock transition or something, not all that stuff holds fish. Something that we've learned this year is, to focus more on the way the channel moves in the lake than just what we visually see.
That's another thing. Channel swings is another area.
The nice part about channel swings, and especially reservoirs like Blue Marsh, or I'm going to say this too, Wallenpaupack. I feel Wallenpaupack and Blue Marsh fish very similar, but Wallenpaupack has better water.
Yeah, it's better water further north, and it's a much bigger lake as well.
Yeah.
But I would agree they tend to fish similar. They're both reservoirs.
Yeah, and I think personally Pack fishes a little better numbers wise because of that stuff. But with Blue Marsh, it can be a struggle. But when you're trying to find the fish out, figure out Blue Marsh, you got to remember, it's a river. So you got to find current.
It's impoundment. Current's
Right.
huge factor.
If you can find any kind of current, then that's where you want to be. That's where the fish stack up. That's where the bait stacks up, and the fish use the different stuff for current break, especially in the winter. So that's why you want to look for these channel swings that are close to rock transitions, pea gravel to chunk rock with wood nearby. I would definitely say.
Agreed.
Because that's where the fish are going to be. That's where they're going to concentrate. That's the most natural part of their environment that they're used to and fighting. You know, and it's something that we saw in our club tournament. As soon as the wind was pushing so hard, that was what was creating the current.
Right, the wind was actually the creeks that flow into our local lake flow from west to east. So normally that's the direction of the current, but we had a severe rain event from a hurricane that was off the coast that generated a pretty big storm for us. Heavy rain, lots of wind. The wind was pushing so hard that it was actually the current was going back up the river, and we found the pattern was just any little transition on the secondary points where that wind was pushing that current past there. They were there. We were getting them on crankbaits. As long as you were able to get that deflection, whether off of a piece of wood or a log laying in the water or a raised up rock, you were getting bit.
Yep, and that goes all back to current. So when you're looking for these winter transition spots, you also want to have the current too. If you're in a reservoir, if you're in a natural lake, or just a standard, low head dam like Ontelaunee, you're looking more for the channel swings, but you don't necessarily need to have the current.
Yeah, and current can mean a couple different things. You can obviously have the current of the dam pulling water, releasing water. You can have natural current that way, but also wind generates current. So if you're fishing on a lake that's not a reservoir, like Steve said, a natural lake, the wind can still create current, and that can change how the fish set up. Or the other important thing about current, whether it be water pulling or wind-related current, in the dead of wintertime and conversely in the dead of summertime, when those fish are set up on those patterns, typically, if they're deep, they don't really move a whole lot until conditions change. But that current can be the difference of when they bite and when they don't. You can be sitting on a school and there's no current there, there's no wind, there's nothing going on right now, and you can see them on your electronics, but they just will not bite. But if you leave and come back an hour or two later and now the wind's pushing a little bit, or now they start drawing a little bit of water from the dam and you get that current in there in one way, shape, or form, now all of a sudden they're biting now, they get turned on.
Imagine current to a fish as a buffet line.
Just taking
if that buffet line ain't, if they're sitting at the end of the buffet line and that buffet line ain't moving, they ain't eating. But as soon as that buffet line starts moving, next thing you know, they're eating everything coming by their face.
Yeah,
within reason.
Crayfish get going, the bait fish get going, and it just gets the fish going, the predatory fish going too.
So we got some of the presentations we just talked about. We have some footage from 11:30, which is what we're talking exactly.
Yeah, November 30th,
Right.
we were out, myself, Steve, and Keith, and we did a little bit of fall to winter transition fishing on our local lake. We'll show that to you here in a second.
Yeah.
That was November 30th of 2019. We had water temperatures that were in the 43 to 44 degree range. Basically, we were just using our electronics to locate fish. I would just graph around points, secondary points, and transition banks that were near deep water. We were concentrating on slightly steeper banks, being that the water was 43 to 44 degrees. Now, if the water would be 53 to 54 degrees, typically then we see the more gradual banks holding more fish. But yeah, channel swings, steeper banks, we were rock transition, and we were around wood was the pattern. We were throwing jerk baits that day and the drop shot in like the laydowns. The laydown is in the water, the root system is up, the top of the tree is down in the water, and the bait was hanging close that particular day to the treetops in like 12 to 18 feet of water.
Right. So
there also wasn't a whole lot of current that day. Our reservoir, they weren't really running much water. but we had a little bit of wind in the middle of the day, and that was the point in time when we had action.
Yeah. And then the sun started going down, temperatures started cooling off, and the fish just kind of shut off.
And the wind stopped.
And the wind
all
stopped.
at one time, and that's when the bite stopped.
Yeah. So we'll show you that here right now. You can kind of see what we're talking about. Right there.
Yep. All right, guys.
Welcome to another edition of Randy and Steve's Outdoor Adventures. We found a school. Here's bass number 1 of the day. Nice little largemouth, fat little fish. He's going back.
And they were sitting, what, 12 foot of water getting
There he goes.
15.
All right. Fish number 1 on the jerkbait. Keith just lost one as well on the drop shot.
Once I get up past it, Steven, you can throw back and bring it across. That's probably when it'll go across the tree. Well, no, you throw it like the boat's up here, then you throw to the tree and bring it
across that point.
Yeah.
Oh, I got one. Got something.
Yep. See, there it is.
Oh, nice bass.
Told you. Steve, don't take up no more, Steve. Hold him down. Attaboy. 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 Okay. Let him go up this way.
All right.
That's fast in December. Well, he's got a raw mouth, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He
That's how they get when.
ate it good.
Yeah.
He was hooked before. Here's the other side.
Oh yeah, you can see right there. He's missing some skin right there. Nice keeper largemouth for Blue Marsh. Hold on, Randy.
Not a bad fish. That's a keeper.
Hold on.
15 and a half. You want to rotate the...
It is.
It is?
It is.
Okay. Nice fish. Going back. Blue Marsh naysayers. I'm going to try a dump shot here. That could get some trouble, ain't it?
Could yank one out of there though. That's how John caught that 6-pounder up the top of Hockin on the Ned rig. Just got it in there in the tree and didn't get hung up and got the bite.
When they were running up the maiden.
I won't take it.
Got him.
Oh, that's a nice
It's a big one. You got him, Keith. See? Yeah, you got him. See? See? I said if you get it in there, if you get him in there without getting hung up. Nice. All right, just take your time. Lean out, lean out, lean out. Attaboy. There you go. Good. All right, now let some line out. Okay, that's good. That's good. Right there is good.
That's a light rod.
We all got one today.
Yep. That's a nice one, Keith.
All right. Thank you, Randy.
Nice job, brother.
That just looked like the hole to put it in, didn't it?
I said if you get it in there without getting hung up, a lot of times you get a bite.
I let this sit there and felt the boom.
I watched him bite it too. I watched your rod
I was
go.
gonna let him take it, like
Bonk.
you said.
Nice largemouth on a drop shot. Back to fight another day. Number 3.
All right, so as you can see on the video, the steeper banks and the wood and the trunk rock. Now, the reason why specifically the steeper banks, and this is something that I have found out recently through other resources on YouTube, Tactical Bass and other sources, just doing my general research, and this is jiving with what we saw. Steeper banks hold the fish because that allows them to move up and down depending on water temperature. If the water temperature goes up, they go up. If the water temperature goes down, they go down. So if at the bottom of those steeper banks, if it's cold, if it's like almost freezing, they're going to be at the bottom of those banks.
The warmest water in a condition like that is on the bottom.
And then as it comes up to 45, even up to like almost 50, then they'll start being up at the top where those trees are actively feeding. And then they'll start, and obviously as we go into a spring situation, they'll start moving back into coves and other things where you see more pea gravel and places for them to spawn.
Right. Water temperature is a huge variable, but another sometimes overlooked variable that can be just as important and sometimes even more important than water temperature is the length of day. When you're in that fall to winter transition, those days really start getting short. That's one of the main things, aside from the water temperature, that dictates how and where those fish move and where they go. And it's the same thing through the winter, and then when you get into the springtime, as the days start getting longer and as the water temperature starts to come up, that's what makes the fish and the bait start moving back shallow again.
Now, we talked about the jerk baits specifically, and the crankbaits, we mentioned them. Crankbaits I find better for us to be in like that 50 to 55 range, maybe even a little bit warmer.
Yeah, once the water gets up into that, the jerkbait reigns supreme, in my opinion, on our local lakes, all the way through that 40-degree water temperature. But once you get into like the low to mid 50s, I agree the crankbait takes over.
Yeah, crankbait, because you can cover more water with it.
That too.
You know, I think that's where it comes down to. Plus, you know, the way we mimic a bait in there, different types of bait come out at that time and they're more hibernation mode when it gets below 50. So we choose specific colors to the crankbaits based on those temperatures as well.
Right.
Can't give you that secret. You know, we got to keep some stuff to ourselves, but but we'll just leave it at that. For those of you that know fishing, 50-degree mark, that's the key for certain types of bait to come out.
You'll start to see, like you said, when that water gets into like the low to mid 50s, you'll just start to see that you'll still catch some on the jerkbait, but you'll catch more on the crankbait. And typically, like you also said, you can cover more water with the crankbait also, so that can also translate to more bites.
So, you know, something we've been dabbling around with too is, you know, with jerkbaits and stuff and crankbaits, there's a lot of bluegill patterns out there, but I've never really done well in bluegill patterns around here.
I catch them on the bluegill patterns. I mean, you know, it's the old saying goes, every color works at one point or another. I can't say I've never caught fish on a bluegill pattern crankbait, but I have. But typically they're not the ones we're looking for.
Yeah.
They're smaller fish.
They're smaller fish. So that tells you it's not really a key, you know, thing for the fish that we want are keying on.
Not around here. I just don't think our water is clear enough for that pattern. But that's just a hypothesis. That's just my opinion.
So the next thing we go and talk about is, you know, well, what if the fish are biting around here on bluegills, but maybe the crankbait isn't the thing, or the jerkbait isn't the thing for the mimic of bluegill? Because you think about it, a jerkbait and a crankbait aren't really the shape of a bluegill, and they don't act like one either.
Right.
You know, a bluegill's very slow, you know, quick moving when it will burst, but it kind of hovers there. It doesn't really move the way a jerkbait would. Jerkbait definitely mimics a true baitfish, like an alewife. You know, a crankbait can mimic like crayfish and baitfish that are digging down in the sand, but or in the rock. But even bluegills, they don't move like that. They just kind of sit there and peck.
Right.
So, you know, something we've been experimenting on is like the finesse jigs.
Yep.
Now you look at the profile of finesse jig, especially in a green pumpkin, which is what works best for us in a jig color or tube color around here. That really looks more like a bluegill.
Yep, and it moves slower.
And moves slower, right. And then when you sit there and just pop it, that's that pecking action. You know, and then depending on the trailer, you can mimic with a jig a crayfish doing the same thing with like a double tail or a crawl, or a bluegill.
Right.
So, you know, if they are eating bluegills, and I know they're eating bluegills in Blue Marsh and Ontelaunee, because we get bites on jigs. That's really what you're looking for. So if you're looking for more bluegill imitation, I think the jig is your better option.
I would agree. The jig's a better way to go. The other thing you can use too, again, it all depends on time of year and the water temperature, water clarity, all that factors into it. Once you start getting into the dead of winter, like in those fall to winter transitions, winter to spring transitions, you can catch them on the jerk baits, on the crankbaits, as Steve said, on the moving baits. But what about when the fish are just not doing anything, not very active, whether it's a cold front situation or whether it's the dead of winter situation where you have the temperature on the bottom of the lake is like below 40 degrees.
Yeah, we're talking the water is just above freezing, which is what we're experiencing right
Cold.
now.
Like the top of the lake is freezing or starting to freeze or just thawing out, but the bottom of the lake, say 20, 25 feet of water, you're talking 37, 38 degrees where those fish are. They're not very active. They're not moving a lot. You know, it's hard to get bites except for during like a certain time of day. So if you're experiencing that, like we were out, what was it? It was the middle to end of December when myself and John went out. Same thing. We were looking for fish with our electronics. We found some. They were in the same area that they had been in for the last 4 weeks. They just had moved a little bit deeper. They were sitting right off the edge of the channel.
Use that exact scenario with with the steep banks where they just moved down instead of up. Where we were catching them, they were now down.
Exactly. They were in the same area, but they had just slid out to a little bit deeper water on the edge of the channel. There was a big group of fish there, just very, very hard to get bites. We actually had to break through ice going up the lake to get to these fish. When we got there, the air temp was in the low to mid 40 degree range, and the water temp was 37 to 38 degrees at the warmest point in the middle of the day. We had some action on finesse style tactics. These fish were deep. You couldn't reach them with a jerk bait, and I personally don't have the skills to catch them with a crankbait that deep. These fish were in the 18 to 25 foot range, depth range. We did find a little bit of success on finesse baits. As Steve said, the finesse jig produced the biggest fish of the day. That was like a 3 pound smallmouth, 3 1/4 pound smallie.
I'll put that picture up right here as Randy's talking about it. I'll show it to you right here now.
That fish was caught on a finesse jig, little 1/8 ounce tiny finesse jig, tiny little hook. I was actually throwing it on a spinning rod because if you throw it on like a normal, you know, heavy or medium heavy jig bait caster, you just bend this hook right out. It's truly a finesse jig, small little weed guard on it, and I had to actually look through my box. I wasn't thinking when I bought a couple of these things to try them. None of my normal trailers that I normally use on a jig or a bladed jig, they're all too big. They wouldn't work. What I actually ended up using was a little 3-inch Mr. Twister tail as a trailer, and I was just, like I said, we were marking fish, 20, 23 feet of water. I was just dragging along the bottom real slow, let it sit, drag it along real slow, let it sit. I mean, painstakingly slow. And when that fish would bite, it would just get a little bit heavy and set the hook. I ended up catching a largemouth on a Ned rig on a little finesse TRD, and I know you had some bites on the drop shot, and then I had caught that nice smallie there on the finesse jig, but you had to dead stick it and fish slow.
And I also probably hooked into the largest muskie I ever hooked into.
That's right.
Yeah, that thing took one of my Stacy 90s, I mean, that was like setting into cement, and then pow, gone.
Yep, $16 jerkbait, gone. And I'm pretty confident, I wasn't far away from there. I was maybe 80 or 100 yards away from where Steve broke off that fish. I'm pretty sure I was into that same fish a month earlier, and interestingly enough, it was the exact same bait.
Exact same color.
Same color, same bait, same everything, and I'm pretty sure it was probably the same fish. He got me too.
And
so.
we knew it was a muskie because a big long mark came up on the fish finder as soon as that happened. Like 10 seconds later, you could see it on the side scan.
We've been in that area probably 4 or 5 times since I hooked that and lost that fish in like the second week of December, and we've marked that fish there, I believe 3 out of those 4 times. So he's in there. We can't keep a hold of him.
But but that finesse bait, something that our local lake, we get really small bluegills. They're all over. The little small bluegills are everywhere. So that little finesse jig, when it flares, and you have the little twister tail, that little swimming action, that looks just like a little baby bluegill to me. It has that more round profile than the slender profile, and so that's like crayfish. I don't think they were thinking as a crayfish. I'm probably certain that fish thought it was a bluegill because
I agree, and with how light the skirt is, it's an 80 strand skirt. The fibers are super small in diameter, and they're so light and subtle. Even when you're just dead sticking it down there, you drag that jig just a little bit. This time of year, you don't want real aggressive hops. Just drag it a little bit, and then when it sits there, that skirt will still undulate and move just a little bit. And then, of course, when you drag it, that twister tail will move just a little bit. It gives you just enough action to tempt those fish, but not too much to the point where it's unnatural.
All right. So, I mean, another thing that you got bites on too. I have a problem fishing it. I just can't wrap my head around it. I know what it mimics. People, bait companies have talked about it for years, that the crayfish that get bit the most, they've tested this, are the ones without claws. But they can't sell the bait and they can't get the marketing for it because it looks stupid.
It looks like nothing.
It looks like nothing. They're like,
it's kind of like a Senko. It
this
looks like
will
nothing,
catch
but it works
fish.
so good.
Right. This will catch fish, but how can we sell it? And that's the problem, that they can't sell it. Till Z-Man came around and they decided, well, we're gonna try it. We did well with the chatterbaits. Why not try with this? Obviously, everyone knows what I'm talking about. It's the Ned rig. I can't fish the Ned rig. I can't stand the thing. But I will say this, it does catch fish. So, that's what it's mimicking. It has a weight on the bottom. It has the long tail. Well, when it goes to the bottom, it sits up like this. The only long, slender thing that sits like that is a crayfish without claws. And it looks stupid, but you caught nice largemouth on one.
I've caught a couple fish on the Ned rig. It's extremely popular in our area, especially at our local lake at Blue Marsh. A lot of guys throw it. I think it's like when any new bait comes out. It's something that the fish haven't seen. So you can catch them on a variety of different finesse baits when that water is super cold like that. I've caught them on tubes down at 39-degree water temperature. Finesse jig, Ned rig, anything that you can drag real slow on the bottom. I'm personally not good at this, but a lot of guys also catch them on a Carolina rig.
Yeah.
Especially if it's windy. The Carolina rig is one of the best ways to fish a small finesse bait in deep water or in high wind, because you have your big weight of a half ounce, 3/4 ounce up above it on that leader. Then you can put a little tiny 3 or 4 inch finesse bait on the back of it and fish it that way. So a lot of guys use the C rig as well.
Yeah. So yeah, Carolina rig. I mean, and the nice part of the Carolina rig is you can cover a lot of ground with it. If you're on a big flat or something like that where there's isolated rock,
Same
kinda,
thing. You can drag that thing along and then
Yeah.
just let it sit. And then drag it along and let it sit.
Yeah, kind of hard. I would say kind of hard for us with Blue Marsh to fish it because of the way it's set up.
Yeah, in some of those really rocky areas, you'll just constantly hang up.
Yeah.
But like you said, if you're on
Yeah.
more of a flat that has smaller chunk rock on it,
Yeah.
it can be really
Oh,
it
yeah.
can be a producer.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the power of it up at Champlain, but I couldn't get bit on it. But again, it was the first time I ever tried it. I don't think I really had the right bait, the right setup. It's
That's
something you have to
stable
learn.
Some
Yeah.
places, like you said, Champlain. Right now, there's an FLW Pro Circuit event going on right now down at Sam Rayburn Reservoir in Texas. That's a staple down there
Yep.
too. The C rig is a proven producer. Me personally, I just don't have very much experience with it, and I'm not very good at it. But I've seen guys catch them
Yeah.
on it, even in my own boat and our local lakes.
Yeah.
I've seen guys catch them on it.
Yeah. So I mean, we talked. Let's see. We talked about the Ned rig. We talked about the tube. We talked a little bit about the tube.
Yeah, the tube, you can fish a tube a variety of different ways. The tube is a steady producer on our local lake as well, and in any water condition, or temperature, I should say. I've caught them all the way down at 39 degrees on tubes, smaller tubes, more finesse looking ones, and then as the water warms, I go to a bigger one.
Yeah.
Caught them in 80-degree water temperature on tubes as well. Anytime the water isn't muddy like after a rain like it is right now, anytime that water has decent to good visibility, you can't really go wrong with a
Right,
tube.
and it kind of fills that same niche as a Carolina rig, though a tube's definitely a lot more adaptable because you can use it as a jig,
Right.
flipping into trees and other stuff depending how you rig it.
Yeah, you can fish it shallow, you can
Right.
fish it deep, you can fish it anywhere.
Well, Carolina rig, you can only really fish on flats, you know, and stuff like that
Not
because
around wood.
not around wood, right? And you can fish around grass a little bit too, but
Yep.
but you know, I mean, that's you know now when you come out of winter, you know, something that we really like catch them onto. We've talked about this in other shows was you know, lipless cranks. Now they have their own like little niche in the springtime for us too. That I would say is probably just after the jerk bait starts to wear off in the spring.
Right.
You
When
know,
that, when that water gets into, when that water hits that 50-degree mark and gets into the low 50s, that's when you start to transition from that
Right.
jerk bait. Fish start moving a little shallower, and then the crankbait, whether it's a lipless or a billed crank,
Yep.
becomes more of a factor.
the lipless, I just prefer lipless in the spring because of the tight wobble. You know, that's the one thing I can say.
Right, especially too the tight wobble, and then in situations where the water is a little dirtier, you know, you have a lot of springtime rains. In most years, you have snow melt, and that water tends to come up a little bit. And when the water temp comes up, fish start to move a little shallower. The lipless is really a killer that time of year, as you said, Steve, because of that tight wobble. And also, again, if the water gets muddy, the rattles. It's a really loud and obnoxious bait. You can call them from a long ways.
Yes, and I mean, there's tons of rattle baits out, or lipless cranks out there, and like I said in one of our previous videos too, like I shared that I want a BFL on a lipless crank. Yeah, yes, I did catch other baits. I caught some on Senko, some on a chatterbait, but those were like one or two fish. I called most of those fish out by fishing a lipless crank, and it was down at the Potomac. Water was cold. It was muddy. It was off color.
Late April.
Late
tournament.
April. Probably the toughest Potomac tournament that I've ever seen as far as that large, because 20 pounds won it.
Yeah, we had 194 boats in the Saturday tournament, and then in the Sunday, which you won on
Yeah.
the co-angler
Yeah.
side, out of 194 guys, this guy right here gets the W. And then the next day, on Sunday, for the second BFL tournament, we had 167 guys, I want to say. I ended up coming in 15th, but that tournament there,
That was a slug. It was interesting from one day to the next, where one day was tough, the next day it was a slug fest.
yes, the first day was tough. It warmed up a little bit, and the second day, I don't know if the fishermen just got more dialed in, or if the fish just turned on that
I
much.
think it was a bit of both.
The second day, it was a bang fest.
You know, I think 24 pounds won it, and
Yeah.
you really look at the numbers for Potomac. You know, and anybody can,
24 is a giant bag.
anyone can argue with me on this. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, I know in the Potomac that 2 and 3 pounders are everywhere.
Yep.
You know, and 4s are pretty common too.
Yep.
But to go and catch 5 fish that weigh 24 pounds, all of those fish, or at least there had to be some 5s and 6s in that bag in order to get to 24. And there's not many 5s and 6s in that river. As
No.
good as of a river as it is, there's just not many because of the tidal stuff.
I agree. The Potomac has a lot of fish. I would say a lot more fish than say the Chesapeake has,
Yes.
in my opinion. But I think the Chesapeake has more of those true giants. There's more of the 5s, 6s, and 7s down there.
Right.
But the Potomac, 2s and 3s are a dime a dozen. 4s are common. So you see a good bag down there is 18 to 20.
Yeah.
That's a good bag. But a great bag, a mega bag, what I would call it, is a 24-pound bag. And it shows, if you go back and look at the results of that tournament, April 21st and 22nd, I believe it was, of 2018, the guy that won it with 24 pounds, second place wasn't even close. It was like 18 or 19.
Yeah.
It wasn't like
Yeah.
he blew everybody away.
Because
Huge bag.
you were top 10 in that tournament, weren't you?
No, I was
top
15th
15?
out of 167 guys with 16 pounds, 15 ounces,
Yeah.
all but 17.
So I mean, you could see within 15 places, you dropped almost
7 pounds.
7 pounds. So I mean,
More.
that tells you
Over
right
7
there
pounds.
how big of a bag that actually was. But let's go back to what we were talking about, the lipless cranks. What I did there, and what I do in our local lakes, is basically you just chunk and wind, and then you crash off anything you can get.
Getting the deflection.
Getting the deflection. Like I use a lipless crank almost like a build. I throw it out there and bang it off anything I can get. You'll see most of my lipless cranks have wear marks on them because that's how I fish them. And usually after a bang, a crank or two later, boom, you get a fish. If the fish is there, obviously.
Right.
But that's generally how I fish them. Muddier water, I tend to use more of the crayfish, dark reds. While if the water's clear, I'll use the silver with blue back, more mimicking more of a bait fish. So I mean, it depends on what body of water works better. But around here, I generally stick with the chrome. And the nice part about lipless cranks is if you go and fish a lake like Ontelaunee. Now, I don't have video of this, but I probably caught one of the biggest bass I've ever caught in Pennsylvania. Fishing like December 28th, like 3 days after Christmas. It was a warm front came through. It was foggy as heck. Keith and I went out and we just murdered giants at Ontelaunee.
Shallow.
I had a 20-pound. If I would have been in a tournament, it would have been a 20-pound bag at Ontelaunee. I had probably a 5-6 pounder that was just an absolute slob. I caught it almost all in rattle traps.
That's the other thing about that trap too. If the fish will bite multiple different things, the trap seems to get you a bigger bite.
Oh yeah,
too.
Yeah. The trap always it just. I don't know what it is, but you might not catch numbers, but you're going to get good fish with it.
It's a great bait if you have if you're a tournament guy and you have a decent limit, but you really need that kicker fish. A trap is a great way to get it.
Now I will say this with traps. There's two types of traps. You got a trap that's more like a willow leaf style, I would say, like a willow leaf blade spinnerbait that's long and slender.
The shape of the bait, more longer, narrower, and then you have the shorter, fatter, taller one, if you will, deeper one.
Yeah. So I mean, the most common that everyone knows is the rattle trap. Or the Bill Lewis rattle trap. That's the one I really like using personally. It's what I have the most luck on. Now, there's some other good ones out there that are the shorter, fatter ones.
Strike King Red Eye Shad.
Strike King Red Eye Shad.
Lucky Craft LC 500.
Yep, those ones work well like a rattle trap where you can chuck and wind, but I think the strength of those ones are better with yo-yoing.
Yeah, that's another thing. You can catch fish on a straight chunk and wind, a straight cast and retrieve on a lipless crankbait, but you can also catch them straight retrieving, but then also hopping it every so often. Yep. Or the other way I've seen guys fish it too, especially the heavier ones like the LC 500. Throwing them out, letting them go to bottom, and then fishing them vertically, like almost like jigging it. Let it rattle up and then fall, and rattle up and then fall. You can catch them that way on a lipless bait as well. It just depends on where they're at, and what they're feeding on, how deep they are.
And what cover too.
Right.
Because like I said, I found that I fish grass better when you have the rounded nose with the wider baits like the red eye shad versus the trap, the regular Bill Lewis rattle trap. I can fish the Bill Lewis rattle trap, but the weeds, I gotta be ticking right off the top. It's a sweet spot. If I'm too far in, it will dig right down in there, and you're done. You can't rip it out. But with those red eye shad, you can get that down a little bit deeper in those weeds and rip that out clean, just because of the shape of it.
Right. If you're fishing hardcover, we're talking about getting the deflection. If you're fishing hardcover, you want to run that lipless crankbait. We call them traps for short because we're usually throwing a rattle trap, as Steve said. But you want to get that lipless crank to deflect, hit a rock, hit a piece of concrete, bridge piling, a stump, a log, anything. You can get that deflection without getting hung up. Obviously, with lipless cranks, you're sometimes going to get hung up. But me personally, I'm not afraid of it. It's going to happen. But you can hit that piece of cover without getting hung up. A lot of times, like you said, you get that bite. 2-3 cranks later after the deflection, boom, they eat it. Or if you're fishing grass and you're reeling right over top of the grass and tickling the top of the grass as you're coming over, and it gets hung up and you rip it out of there, same thing. You rip it free and you get 2-3 cranks on the handle and they just crash into it.
Yeah, and it's fun when they do that. I mean, that's one of my favorite bites. Just reminds me of like old school trout fishing. Now we grew up fishing to throwing spinners out.
Inline spinners
for trout.
Rooster tails and panther martins, all the good stuff.
Yep, and just crashing into it. It's fun. That's the style. If we can get them in moving baits, we'll throw moving baits.
Right, and the another advantage to a moving bait is sometimes the fish, they just don't want to eat. You know, so I grew up fishing plastics, but I realized, you know, over the years that sometimes they'll just look at them plastics and they just don't want to eat them. But with the moving bait, with the crankbait or with a spinner bait, or with a lipless crankbait, if you can get that deflection, you can get that reaction bite and get a bite that you normally would not be able to get any other way.
Yeah. So, you know, now what we talk about the route lipless trout. That's more of like a spring.
That's a huge staple in the
That's a
springtime,
huge
all over
spring.
the country, not just.
You can get in the late winter, but like I said, bladed baits tend to be better in early winter. Not bladed baits, sorry. Lipped crankbaits, like regular stock crankbaits. Lipless tend to be better in the spring. But something that tends that we've got to experiment more. We've got to learn. But we've been in the boat with people who've done it. Is bladed jigs, like not blade, sorry, bladed jigs. Sorry, bladed baits.
Blade
like,
baits like Silver Buddy,
Buddies, yeah. The Demiki Volt.
Demiki Volt. There's a lot of different ones on the market. I forget what.
There's
the,
a
what
Mega
the
Bass
one's
one.
called.
Yeah,
Jackal has a couple
Jackal has
out.
one. Yeah, that one's made a computer chipboard.
Right. You know, a lot of them are just hammered steel or stamped steel, and then they weight them with lead at the bottom. The Silver Buddy is probably the most well-known one,
Yep.
and that's a bait. You fish it vertically, you throw it out, you let it sink to the bottom. It's a lot of guys use it like when the fish are grouped up offshore, whether it be in the springtime or in the wintertime. If you know you're on them, and you have a school located, the blade bait is another way where you can get a reaction bite at those fish. You just throw it down, you let it hit bottom, and you hop it just not much, a foot or two off the bottom. You'll feel it start to really vibrate, and then you let it go back down.
Yep.
We've been watching guys here in the wintertime on our local lake that were out a little bit further, catching them offshore on blade baits, both bass and channel catfish.
Yeah.
It's a great way to get a school fired up as well.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something that in the spring, in the winter, when you're looking for that reaction bite, that's a good one to do because they'll sit there and just look at it, and then next thing you know, when they start getting more and more grouped up around, sitting there staring at it, then it becomes a competition, and one will finally go for it. So there's a bunch of different types of them, like we just named them, but that's something that will work early spring and winter, where they're deep. And that's the big problem about winter is if they're shallow, yeah, everyone, jerk bait, whatever, your standard stuff will work. But if they're deep, there's very limited stuff that you can get down deep, and bladed baits are one of those baits that you can work as a reaction and get deep.
Yeah, blade bait, tail spinner, or finesse spoon is one of the few ways you can get a reaction strike from fish that are in that deep water, 20, 30,
right,
sometimes more depending on your lake. When they're deep, that's one of the best ways to target them and get a reaction bite.
And one that I've personally seen, Harvey's Lake up out outside of Wilkes-Barre.
Yep.
Okay, Harvey's Lake's a tough lake to fish, but there are some big fish at Harvey. There's some big smallies and there's some big largemouth. The largemouth tends to hang around the docks and the weeds, but the smallies, they tend to cruise out in that open water.
On the edge of that little ledge.
Yeah, on the edge of the ledges and stuff, out in 30, 40 feet. And for me, it's tough because I've never grown up fishing super deep. 10, 15, yeah, I'm good with that. Past 20, I'm out of my element. If they're not hitting drop shot with that, then I'm clueless. So one of the things that I saw was we were fishing a tournament up there for a district tournament, District 1 tournament, and there was a guy, and I had two largemouth and a smallmouth in the box from flipping docks with jerk baits and Senkos. I mean, yeah, it actually won me the tournament because you don't need much at Harvey's for a co-angler, but so it was okay day for me, but we saw these locals coming down, and they were sitting with these big rods, sitting there jerking, like jigging, and next thing you know, they get a fish. 5 minutes later, another fish, and you can just tell by the shape, these are bass.
They're big smallies.
They're big smallies. You can see them. And we came up and said, as they come floating towards us, they're like, hey, how you guys doing? Talking like, oh yeah, we bet good day fishing today for us. We're like, we kind of struggle a little bit, and then we figured out that, you know, what they were doing, they were sitting there jigging spoons, you know, like, not big spoons, but, you know, you could see them, they were
Using
spoons.
a Castmaster?
I think that's what the guy switched to, that one fit I was with, and he hooked up with one of these big smallies. Of course, to throw it, because it's, you know, with that weight coming around, it's
Right.
easy to throw.
He got the bite.
Right, but he got the bite, so I bet you a blade bait and a spoon that time of year would have worked, and that was definitely the end of October.
Late October.
Late October, yeah. And the thing is with that up there is that's a lot more north, so that water was probably where our water would be.
We'd be in the 50s.
We'd be in the
but
50s.
up there, I
They're
bet
probably
it
in the
was upper 40s.
upper 40s, I think, is what it was. And so that tells you right there, Harvey's is another lake that stuff would work at, and it's probably got to work at our local lakes as well.
And I'll point out too, Harvey's is clear lake
Yes.
in our local lakes around
Yes.
here, so I think that's another reason why they hit the spoon and the blade up there a little bit better.
Yeah.
A little bit more visibility. You can call them in from further away.
Yeah, totally.
Another popular wintertime bait, other than we went over the finesse baits, the blade baits, the jigs, and then when you get into that transition, whether it's the fall winter transition or winter to spring transition, we talked about the crankbaits and the lipless cranks. Another thing that a lot of people use all over the country, especially out west, that's gained a lot of popularity over the last couple of years is the Alabama rig. Alabama rig, I've caught them pretty much any time of year. It just depends on the lake. Some lakes it works better at certain times of year, you know, than others.
It depends on if you get a lot of baits, schools of bait.
Right.
I think that's what it depends on.
On our local lakes around here, I have not had hardly much success with it. Again, around here, Blue Marsh, Ontelaunee, caught some big crappies on it, but I haven't found the right color, weight, you know, number of baits. I haven't found the right setup yet exactly for bass around here yet. But up in the Poconos, up at Wallenpaupack, caught a lot of fish on it.
Yep.
Smallmouths, stripers,
Raystown too.
big walleyes.
Raystown, I was told, when I was out there at Raystown for the state championship, the guy had an A-rig on. So they do work out there too. Just you got right time of year, right setup. You know, you got to figure that part
You need
out.
the right size of baits, the right colors, the right size of jig heads, the right weight of jig heads, so you can cover the correct depth range. But if you know, there's a lot of variables there. But if you can get that dialed in, that can be a dynamite way to catch them too. Even in the colder water, you know, you see a lot of guys just chunking and winding it, throw it out, reel it in. That can work, but in my experience, especially in the other places, other states, New York areas that I've caught them, and northeastern part of the state here in Pennsylvania, same thing. It really helps to try and get that reaction bite. So if you throw it out and just reel it in, again, you'll catch some. But if you can throw it out there and have an irregularity to your retrieve, whether it's a you know, 1, 2, 3 turns on the handle, and then on that 5th turn to the handle, just speed it up, or pause the bait, you know, twitch the bait every so often in your retrieves. What that does is it makes that wire rig, that Alabama rig, it makes it flare. It makes the rig collapse and open up like a natural school of bait would. A lot of the bites that I've gotten on that Alabama rig is when you're retrieving it, and then I'll pause it and pump the rod, and then go back to retrieving it, and then same thing. It's just like a reaction bite, you know, hitting something with a crankbait. You get that 2, 3 turns on the handle, after that irregularity, and boom, they hit it.
Yeah.
Or when you're reeling it in, and you hit your maximum depth range, and then you start to get close to the boat, and then the bait will change direction, and it'll start to rise. I've had them hit it right there by the boat
Yep.
then, too, and about
Same.
scare the daylights out of you.
Pack, they like to do that.
Yeah. I was on a school of stripers on Wallenpaupack back in September, and it was just, you know, 5 to 8 pound hybrid stripers. It was just one after another. But the first couple, that's what they did. They hit it right when it turned up at the boat and scared the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
But the A-rig is a great way to target them too. You can fish that thing in that mid depth range all the way down to, you know, up to like 20 feet. Or down to 20-foot depth, depending on how much weight, you know, and how many jigs you have on it and all that stuff. Got to be careful with it though in our lakes where you're concentrating on hard cover because it will get snagged.
Oh yeah.
And typical lure retrievers won't get it unsnagged a lot of times just because the way the bait is. So I try. If they're keying in on it, you know, I'll use it, but I really like fishing that thing over top of grass personally.
Yeah, I much prefer grass. I've gotten a lot more action.
I've had more success with it in grass lakes as well.
Yeah.
But we're still working on it, you know, so we'll see what happens. But it is an option.
Yep. So, I mean, those are kind of like the patterns that we've looked for, you know, to kind of wrap things up, you know, with the cover, the baits, temperatures that we look for, you know, 30s to 40s, you want to look deeper. 40s into 50s, the fish are starting to come up into the tops of trees and the areas where you can start getting some more typical moving baits. And then past 50, that's when they should be starting to move towards the spawn and the transitions.
Right.
Or they're coming, or on the flip side, winter, they're starting to get to their wintering holes.
Right.
But you know, in those temperatures, you know, we're talking 50s. You got a lot of open book there. You can use the jigs, you can use Senkos, you can use the Ned rig, you can use lipless jerk bait, spinner bait. You got a lot of options at that 50. They'll hit just about almost about anything.
Once that water gets into the mid 50s, it's kind of open season. You can kind of throw anything you want.
Right. So then once it gets past 50, you want to focus more on, you know, your Ned rigs, your drop shot, finesse jigs, jerk bait, slowing things down a little bit, going more finessey with that. Once you get past 45, you know, then you're talking about even narrowing it down further. Blade baits, you know, finesse jigs, Ned rig. Take those Carolina rig. Always, no matter what, if you're wintertime fishing, have a jerk bait tied on just in case. It's one of those baits that time of year, it's going to get bites at some point, so it's good to have with you.
And that's another great reaction bait.
Yeah.
You know, you can catch fish on jerk baits if they're in that depth range where you can target them with a jerk bait. You can make make them react to that jerk bait sometimes when they don't even want to bite plastics. You can still at least catch one or two out of the school on a jerk bait.
Yeah. I mean, and down to freezing, it's probably you want to really limit yourself to blade baits.
Once you get down below 40 degrees, then you're talking fishing slow, especially if the fish go deep and you can't target them on that jerk bait. Then you want to slow down. Even when you think you're going slow enough, slow down some more. Use your electronics, because if you're confident that you're on fish, at least with me, that gives me the confidence to know, okay, I'm on fish. I just got to go slow, fish real slow, let that bait just soak, and chip away at the school that way. I can't tell you, I learned something this year. I've gotten a lot of bites just dead sticking a plastic. Throw it out there, and especially if you know you're confident that you're on them, a lot of times, if they're not real active, just don't do anything. Throw it out there and just fish it really, really slow. Drag it just a little bit or give it a little twitch, you know, every so often, and just fish it slow. You'd be surprised how long you can let a bait sit, and then all of a sudden the line starts moving. That fish that I caught in the footage there, that first little largemouth that I caught, I actually caught that fish on a Ned rig, and I wasn't even doing anything. I had thrown that Ned rig out, let it hit bottom, and I set my rod down to change the hat that I was wearing. So the rod sat there for probably 20, 25 seconds. I went over there and I picked up on it, and the fish was just there.
Yep, and it wasn't even swallowed. It was like actually on the outside of the mouth.
It was barely hooked in the top of the mouth.
Yeah, so like this time of year too, the fish are less likely to swallow things too, just because they're not actively feeding.
Everything's slower. You know, they're a cold-blooded animal. Their metabolism is slow this time of year. Same thing. Another tidbit of information too, when you get into the wintertime like this, once that water gets down below 50 and especially gets down into the low 40s, they don't fight hard.
No.
You don't need the real heavy rods, you don't need the real heavy line. Downsize everything.
Yep.
Down to that medium action spinning rod or that medium light action spinning rod, medium action bait caster with the fluorocarbon or braid to fluorocarbon leader if you prefer braid. I'm going down to like 8-pound test, and you even get a hold of them 3-4 pounders every so often. They don't fight hard. That smallie didn't even jump. You know, when that water was 38
Yeah.
degrees that day, you know, they just, you kind of think like you hooked a leaf at first. You can feel a head shake every once in a while, but you can lighten everything up, lighter wire hooks,
Yep.
and you'll get more bites that way also by downsizing.
You know, and going back to everything too, you know, we talked about all, you know, about all these artificial lures, and that's just the way we fish. At the end of the day, and we've done this in the past, if you're not confident with that stuff, if you're not sure, and this goes for really any fish, the best thing to do this time of year, and you got open water, go get yourself some minnows.
If you just want to catch fish,
Yeah.
live bait is really the best way to go.
You can see it in our video for the Antietam Lake. That Antietam last year that I did, that was literally last week in December. Bobbers with small trout minnows, and I caught a good amount of trout. I mean, I caught a limit of trout out there. You're talking about a lake that hasn't been stocked in months, and I'm catching a limit of trout on minnows, and it didn't have to work for them. You know, it was only a couple hours. Bass the same way. You know, just get bigger shiners. They, you know, that the nice part about the shiners is going to be down there in a spot, and it's going to do the work for you, and it's as natural as it's going to get. Bass tend to hit live bait better, I would say, at least minnows, when I see it turn cold. So if you're just trying to go out there and catch fish and have fun, always keep a bucket of shiners with you. Like, don't have to be a lot. Just go get yourself 12 minnows and cabela's or something like that.
And that's what we do when we ice fish
Yeah.
too. You know, we're running some artificial baits. We jig for them also, but we always have tip ups out or rod tenders with shiners as well. We personally just try and fish with artificials
Yeah.
as much as we can, just because we're tournament guys, and in a tournament, live bait's not legal, so we try and just learn how to get bit on artificial.
Yep.
On artificial baits, but that's us. Again, if you, the best in the dead of winter, if you want to go out and you want to just catch fish, live bait's the way to go.
Yep, totally. All right, so I mean, as you see, we're probably wrapping up here. I think we pretty much picked our brains of what we've learned the past couple of years, as well as what we've learned throughout our whole lives, bass fishing in the wintertime, because we've turned fishing into a year-round sport. You know, and we got to be able to adapt and figure things out as we go, because as we know, weather's constantly changing. Pennsylvania's getting warmer. You know, it's definitely happening. So we got to figure out how to adapt to the fish and figure out what they're doing, because our tactics aren't always going to be the same.
Right. Years ago, you know, it would get cold in mid to late December, early January, and we'd be putting the boat away for 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, and you know, we'd just mainly be ice fishing with live bait. But now with it being warmer, we're not having safe ice. We're keeping the boat running, and we're using the electronics, and we're getting on those schools of wintering fish, and we're figuring out ways to get a couple bites on the artificial. So, you know, it's winter time. You know, you're not going to go out and pound them most of the time. A lot of times you're only fishing for 1, 2, maybe 3 bites. But it's a heck of a lot better than sitting inside on the couch and catching cabin fever.
You know, and there's some other places, isolated locations too around here. You know, that guys know for years. You know, obviously like the power plants of Susquehanna, good year-round place as far as the winter time, guys. I mean, I know they cool down, but the fish still congregate in those areas because it's a little bit warmer.
Right.
But you know,
Warm water discharges. That's
right.
that's a known thing around the country. Good place to try in the wintertime as
and
well.
something that we've done, and it's specifically over Ontelaunee. Whenever you have a spring feeding into the lake, a known spring that comes out of the ground, you have 55-degree temperature water year-round coming out of ground. So that water is going to be naturally warmer and have more oxygen, so the fish are going to congregate there. So that's enough. Those are other specific spots that you want to look for beyond what we've talked about with the channel swings.
Right, especially if you don't have a boat and you're a bank
Yes.
guy. If you know where springs come into a lake that's going to have slightly warmer water, that would be an area that you want to concentrate from. If you're fishing on the bank, or if you're wading, or if you are fishing in a boat but you don't really have the electronics to go and directly find them, those are good areas to try.
You know, and we're not talking creeks. Creeks are different from springs.
Right, we're talking about underground.
We're talking about underground springs. Like we know the local lake on Ontelaunee has Peters Creek. You know, everyone knows about it. It's a spring that comes out of the ground. That temperature water is always warmer in the winter.
Right.
And
Even when the whole lake is under a foot of ice, that section, that little section of the cove where that underground spring comes in, there's always no ice there. The ducks, the geese, the swans, they always congregate there too, just because they know as well as the fish that the water's warmer in that one little area.
So that's again, those are some other specific spots that our rules will help, but don't always necessarily apply. But definitely will be a winner. Spot. High percentage area. So again, that's what you want to look for in winter. Those areas at different lakes. So
we pretty much covered everything from the late fall to early winter transition, all the way through the den of winter, which is where we are now in a couple weeks. We're going to start into that late winter to early spring, the pre-spawn transition, if you will. Our days are already starting to get longer. I would say in another month, another 4 to 6 weeks, the fish are going to start to move and start going back the other way here. So
our air
hang on.
temps are going to be staying in the 40s. I can guarantee you that. Long-term forecast is basically consistent mid to low 40s.
More mild weather, So it's going to be upon us here before you know it. So hang on. Now's a good time to restock on your baits, on your lures. Get new line on those reels, and get ready here. It's going to be here before you know it.
Hopefully we'll get some early spring action for you for tournaments too. We got a lot. We got Isaac Walton League. We got the Berks Bassmasters. I know we got some Potomac and other stuff going on for our club. We try to keep the Blue Marsh stuff down to our minimum because that's our home lake. We don't want to give away too many of our secrets and
plus
things.
We're not very good.
Yeah. What little we have, we kind of want to hold on to.
We're still learning. The first tournament is going to be coming up March 29th. So that's a crazy thought. In 2 months we're going to be. It's going to be full swing here real quick, but. We'll see what happens here. Our lakes did freeze this past week. Now, yesterday we had a real big rain event. We got dumped on. It was between an inch and a half of rain. So I just drove over the lake on my way here, and it is chocolate milk. I'm talking light brown, chalky, ugly. The water's high. It's raging. It's cold. It's muddy. So a lot of that ice broke up. So now it's going to be interesting to see what happens this week. If we have decent weather this weekend, I might be able to get the boat out, and maybe we can get a little footage for you here. Get a little more action here. A couple fish.
That wouldn't be bad. I was thinking maybe a Pocono trip maybe, but I don't know. You gotta wait and see.
Well, that's another thing. You and I are going up to the Poconos February 7th, 8th, and 9th. We're going up to the Poconos. Luckily, their weather forecast, their extended forecast is looking like they're going to have high temperatures in the upper 30s and low temperatures in the mid 20s. So if that trend holds up for the next 2 weeks, hopefully we might have safe ice up there, and we can get some footage to you that way. But weather's king. We're going to see what happens.
Yeah, we gotta be able to adapt to what we're given. Making lemonade out of lemons.
Sometimes you just got to take those lemons and make lemonade. So we're going to see what happens, see what the weather does, but whether it stays warm and we open water fish, or whether it does decide to get cold for a little bit and we get a little ice fishing in, we're gonna do what we can, and hopefully we can bring you guys some footage.
All right, so that's it, and this is Ramsey's Outdoor Adventures, and keep on fishing.